I had known Farmer Ben long before I started working for him. Every Saturday morning, he could be found ass-naked on top of his barn, screaming louder than his lungs should have allowed him and shaking his fists at the sky. Sometimes he'd be shouting obscenities, other times it'd just be high-pitched howls of both joy and fury. On the plus side, for me who lived right across the street from him, he made for a solid replacement for my alarm clock. Since my bedroom window was facing the barn, and therefore Ben in all of his glory, the first thing I'd do would be drawing the blinds, in case I hadn't the night before. On those days, I would often wonder about this odd man. For example, I would have loved to know how exactly he'd gotten up on top of that barn in his obviously intoxicated state, and how he always managed not to fall off. Had I not observed him do this over and over again, I would have been a lot more worried for him. That was all though. For the rest of the week, he'd keep a fairly low profile and I'd often encounter him outside. He'd greet politely, lifting or tipping his ball cap each time, and bid me good day. Sometimes, we would talk about small, random things, like how my aunt was doing or how business was getting on for Ben himself, but it's not like we really knew each other. As for me, I lived with my uncle back then. My parents had separated and I knew I had to find somewhere else to stay. Being in my mid-20s, I figured it was high time for me to move out either way. While my other relatives' places weren't what I'd had in mind, I had always gotten along very well with my aunt and uncle, so when the former fell ill, I agreed to come over and help her husband take care of her. I quit my job to move in with them, but that wasn't too tragic of a loss. I took up work in the area here and there, enough to earn some good cash but nothing stable. That was until Lucy, my aunt, passed away. The day of her death was one of the saddest of my entire life, but I can't even begin to imagine how it must have been for my Uncle John. He was never quite the same afterwards. He became a husk of his former self, going about his day in an almost trance-like state, his eyes always glazed and the look on his face apathetic. I tried to be somewhat of a comforting presence, but despite my best efforts, I hardly ever managed to lift his mood. Sure, there'd be better days occasionally, but I suppose the loss of his wife was simply too much for him. While I understood that, it hurt seeing him this grief-stricken. It was on one of those days that I was walking up the hill back to my uncle's house after spending the noon at work in town, helping out at a nearby cafe, one of those little part-time jobs of mine. I was lost in thought when I heard the clopping of hooves on the pavement behind me, and upon turning around saw Farmer Ben, leading the largest, fattest horse I'd ever seen. He greeted me with a friendly wave as him and the giant animal kept approaching. I like horses a lot, and the bigger, the better, so this was obviously something that warranted special attention. I stayed still so they could catch up with me before falling into pace with them. "I didn't know you had horses," I said. "I don't," Ben replied. "Just this one, and I only got it today." "It's huge," I remarked. "Never seen a Belgian draft horse before?" "Oh, is that what you call these?" "I don't know. I guess. It looks like one, but I'm not an expert," he replied. "I don't even like horses, to be honest." "Do you?" He gave me a quick sidelong glance before adding, "Do you want to sit on it?" I nodded eagerly and immediately tried to crawl my way up on the large horse's back. Ben ended up having to give me a bit of a lift, but eventually, I managed to climb on top. He then started leading us along again while I patted the beast's neck. "I'm not hurting it, am I? Since it doesn't have its saddle on." "Please, it's twice your size. I don't think it knows you're up there at all. Even so, this isn't exactly a normal horse." "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing, nothing at all." He paused. "I may or may not have stolen it from a certain asshole I know, but don't worry, he deserved it." "All right. So I guess the cops are gonna show up around here sometime soon?" "They won't, don't worry. How's your uncle holding up?" I sighed. "Feels like he's getting worse every day, to be honest. He won't even talk to me anymore. I know he needs his space and I'm trying to respect that, but I just wish it didn't have to be that way." "He's lucky he's got someone who wants to talk to him," Ben answered. You know, if you have some of that talk to people kinda energy pent up inside you, you could always talk to me instead. I'd pay you. I just stared at him from atop the giant horse for a little while. I wasn't sure what to say. I thought he was joking. He held my gaze, looking quite serious indeed. I'm not a counselor, I finally told him. I'm not looking for a counselor. I don't want a professional opinion. I just want someone to listen to me, treat me like a friend. A friend you'd give money to? You say it as if it's a bad thing, Ben said. Money's good. Keeps people alive and connected. It sounds weird, I get that, but I mean it. You'd be doing something that seems to come easy to you, and I'm not kidding with the payment. I've got 2 employees helping me with the farm as well. If you want a friend, why not reach out the normal way? Why pay someone? I'm not an idiot, I have my reasons, okay? This is my offer, take it or leave it. Since I'm telling people about this, you may have already guessed what I chose to do. It took me a while to come to the decision, and I had to sleep on it for a night or two, but eventually I ended up in front of his doorstep late in the afternoon. Ben was happy enough to let me in, and we sat down in his kitchen. I hadn't seen much of his place yet, but it looked very nice. It was rustic and old, but in an incredibly charming way. Just what you'd imagine from a classic farmhouse. Judging from the fine, yet slightly worn curtains, drapes and tablecloths which adorned the living room, hallway and dining room, someone had apparently once made an effort to pretty up his home, but all the decorations had faded and grown dull. I couldn't help but wonder why none of them had been replaced. This is a bit awkward, right? Ben asked, holding my gaze from across the kitchen table we were sitting at. He carefully nudged a cup of hot milk over to me, which he'd poured me after I'd turned down the offer of coffee. Could be worse. Your place is really nice, I said, giving him a soft smile. I reached for the cup and folded my hands around it to warm up my palms. Ben shifted in his seat, taking a sip of his coffee. I think we should clear up some things first. He cleared his throat. Well, there's some ideas to be had about the job I'm offering you here. I don't want you to feel like, okay, let's cut this short. I'm a weirdo, aren't I? I offered him an uncertain smile. I wanted you to answer that question, he told me.